words, right? Don't worry about anything. In fact, that really popular song that many of us grew up listening to, Don't Worry, Be Happy. Really nice jingle. These are good sentimental words, but they're not practical, right? At least we think not. They're not practical because somebody comes along well-meaning, tells us not to worry about anything. And then that lasts for about 5 minutes. And then the next thing comes up. And then we end up finding ourselves falling asleep at night staring at the ceiling. We end up jittering. We end up doing all those different things that shows us we're a little on edge. So what words do Jesus give to us today, and what value are they? Is this just mere good, nice, sentimental, hallmark, feel-good words, or is there more truth to this? Well, this is part 2 of a 2-part sermon. Last week we took a look at part 1. Last week we took a look at Jesus telling us to be able to actually store up for ourselves good treasure in heaven, to have the right and proper eyes, to make God our master rather than the other things of the world that try to enslave us. And really the follow-up question is what he's addressing here, because to his audience members who were first hearing these words, they might have thought to themselves, well, you know, if I do seek treasure in heaven, if I look with good eyes, if I submit to God as my master, who's going to take care of me? What about my needs? Well, I once heard worrying is a lot like sitting in a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't take you anywhere. And right now, Jesus, once again, is he's asking us to get our priorities right. Because living as a Christian doesn't mean you get zapped out of the real world whenever you accept Jesus Christ. Instead, it's a changed life. It's a changed life to be able to live in the real world, but to have a different set of priorities in doing so. And that's exactly what Christ is going to be teaching us here today. And first, just to see that these words aren't said in a vacuum, I got to take you guys back. So let's go ahead and get the historical setting right here. You see, Matthew is writing this gospel to his audience. And there's an interesting belief that the audience that was first listening to Matthew on this one were made up of a lot of inner-city urban poor people. A lot of inner-city urban poor people from the slums. And so they would first be reading this, and I'm telling you, if you thought life was rough today, back then, it was a lot worse. I'll save you guys the descriptions, but back then, they didn't have a welfare system. They didn't have economic opportunity to turn your own fortunes around. Basically, if you were born poor, the odds are you were probably going to die poor. And so these urban poor people that would be listening to Jesus' words, they might be thinking, well, that's all fine and dandy, but Jesus was talking to a lot of rural poor people. They were talking to all those farmers, and maybe all the farmers in Galilee around the time of Jesus were these really simple, salt of the earth. Maybe they didn't have a lot of money, but they had their character about them. And no. What Matthew is trying to convey here is Jesus' audience. They might have been rural, but poverty is poverty no matter what setting you grew up in. Not having enough food is not having enough food no matter what environment you found yourself in. And on top of everything else, whether you were in the urban setting or the rural setting, you got taxed by the Roman Empire. And we took a look at that, last week. That was the powerful exploiting the poor, trying to get whatever money they could scrounge up from them to feed their lavish lifestyles. And so into this historical setting now steps Jesus. He comes in, he gives grace. And in giving that grace, asks us and in fact urges us to seek the kingdom of God as our highest good. To live the Christian life, to live God's kingdom on earth just as it is in heaven. And in doing so, God will take care of all the other goods that we need. For I tell you this, brothers and sisters, if you're going to spend all your time worrying about food and clothing, eventually that's all you're ever going to think about. every other priority is going to start getting pushed at the peripheries. Instead, seek first the kingdom of God and trust Him to be able to provide for everything else that you need. And it's interesting because we read these words and we might misunderstand what Jesus is talking about at first. He wasn't advocating laziness. He wasn't against careful planning. And he certainly wasn't saying that planning for the future somehow demonstrated a lack of faith. I know certain Christians that are like that. But Jesus is not advocating laziness, nor is he saying planning for the future is a lack of faith. In fact, concern, responsibility, that demonstrates a strong faith. There was a story once of two farmers. Two farmers that were told the rain's coming. Both farmers heard the message. Only one farmer, though, went out and tilled his field and got ready. Now, which one had the more faith? Farmer that went to till. Jesus is not addressing the concern here. Jesus is not addressing wise planning for the future. That's all well and good. What he's getting at is that anxiety, that worry, that constant thing that just keeps us up at night. And we've all been there. How am I going to get the bills paid next month? What's going to happen to my child? My company's downsizing. Will I have a job next week? We've all been there. We've all had those worries where it causes us to stare at the ceiling at night. What Jesus is saying here, though, is that if we are going to let worry consume us and anxiety overrule everything, that's actually demonstrating the weak faith. It's demonstrating the weak faith. And it's interesting the way Jesus puts this, because back in his day, there were a lot of idols, just the same as there are today. And these other Gentiles, the people he's talking about, they used to go and worship the idols, but I guarantee you it never gave them peace. It never gave them peace because these false gods weren't real. And so basically what you would have happen is that these people would be constantly, my crops aren't doing so well, and so they would pray to this God for rain, or my wife isn't able to bear a child, so they would pray to this God for fertility. But it never gave them any peace. The reason being is, each one of us has a part of our lives that can only be filled by God. We were made to be in a relationship with Him, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in Him. If we were made to bear God's image and be in a relationship with Him, nothing else is going to fill that void. Let me put it to you this way. Do you guys remember whenever we were kids or we had kids and you gave them that one toy that had all the shapes in it, and you gave them all the pieces that had all the shapes that corresponded with those holes? And it was supposed to teach your kids, okay, the circle goes here, the square goes here, and they were supposed to put the shapes into the box. Might have been made out of plastic or wood, but you guys remember that. It was supposed to teach your kids shapes, right? So what happens if you or your child try to put the piece in the wrong hole? Didn't fit. Or if it did, there was a little bit of that empty space where the shape in the hole didn't match up. Oftentimes, whenever we worry, whenever we run after the cares of this world, it's like trying to fill that shape with something that wasn't meant to fit there. It's like trying to fill that void with something that was never meant to fill that void, because only God can be the one to fill that void. That's who we were designed to be in relationship with. And if you excessively worry, it can damage your health, it can disrupt your productivity, it can hurt your relationships with God and with other people. If you're constantly on edge, worry is a pretty destructive force in today's world. So really the bottom line that we have to ask ourselves is, have you done all that you can? And this is what I mean by that. In a situation that you're worried about, have you done all that you can? If your answer to that question is no, then keep doing until you've done all that you can do. And if you've done everything you can in a situation, you can honestly answer yes, then there's no point worrying about it because there's nothing further you can do. So either way, worry doesn't have room to be able to exist here, because it's either I haven't done everything, in which case I'm not going to worry, I'm going to do, or I have done everything, in which case I'm not going to worry and I'm going to let God do. But either way, worry doesn't exist in the realm of a Christian who truly is trusting God. Concern is, planning is, but not this excessive anxiety and this excessive worrying. Because honestly, the follow-up question to that is, are you looking at your situation through God's eyes? Are you looking at your situation the way God does? Because if you look at your situation the way God does, then He might show you, okay, you haven't done everything yet. There's still a little more you can do whenever we're tempted to rest. Or, as is more likely the case, when we look at our situation through God's eyes, He tells us to rest when we try to keep on doing and doing and doing. To look at our situation through God's eyes, that is how we manage the worry. You see, worry paralyzes, concern moves you to action. These things are the exact opposite of each other. We oftentimes think, oh, but I'm just being concerned about this situation. No, if you were concerned, you act on it. It's once you move past that point of doing everything you can do that it turns into worry. And so, planning is time well spent. Worrying is time wasted. And Jesus is saying this to everybody and every one of us because it discourages the rich from focusing on their own worldly success and worrying about it. And it tells the poor, don't focus on your own misery. And what He's asking us to do here is He's asking us to learn from the birds and the flowers. And we all know about the bird, right? The Trashmen taught us that song, Surfing Bird, the bird is the word, the song we all grew up listening to. Jesus asks the question here. Consider the birds, look at the flowers, are you not much more valuable than they? Birds don't stay idle. Birds work, but ultimately it's God who feeds them. If God's grace isn't there, it doesn't matter how hard the bird works. But if God's grace is there, then He provides for the bird. Take a look at the flowers. Jesus compares them to Solomon, wise King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. And yet He still says that even Solomon in all of his wisdom didn't quite grasp this. He's saying to us, look at the flowers that are here today and gone tomorrow. If God cares enough about the flowers, can He not care for you? Are you not much more valuable than they? And it's interesting because Jesus is using a really cool teaching tool here. He's using rhetoric. And basically, He's asking a series of questions. And we can go ahead and answer along. Is God all powerful? Yes. Is He all good? Yes. Does He care for the birds and the flowers? Yeah. Did He not make you in His image? Gave you a soul, fashioned you a body, gave you everything in creation for your enjoyment. Did He not give you His word? Did He not even give you His only begotten Son? And did He not already accomplish the hardest act of all, dying and then beating death so that we can be free? Isn't your life and your body more important than food and clothing? So if God has done all of this, if He's given you your life and your body, which is the greater thing, will He not also provide for you the food and the clothing, which is the lesser and the much easier thing to do? If He takes care of the big things, why do we worry ourselves sick over little things? Why are we reluctant to trust God with the little things, the daily needs? So basically, Jesus is saying to us not to worry, to seek His kingdom, and to trust that God will provide. He's saying for us not to worry about tomorrow, let tomorrow worry about itself. For each day has its own problems. Because as we talked about, worrying can become an idol. Worrying becomes the idol whenever we start to allow it to take our eyes off of Jesus. We all know the story of Peter and the boat. We just talked about it. We all know that story. Peter and the other disciples are on the boat. The storms are ravaging. They're raging. The seas are probably splashing everybody. The wind's howling. They don't know what to do. Maybe none of them can even swim. And yet, throughout all of this chaos, they see something on the horizon. And one of them goes, "No, that can't be. Guys, I think it's him." And so Peter actually has enough faith to say to Jesus, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you out of the water." Jesus said, "Come." Notice none of the other disciples walked out with Peter. We always pick on Peter because he started to sink, but none of the other disciples even got out of the boat. And Peter starts walking, and he keeps his eyes on Jesus. No problem. It's when Peter starts getting fearful. It's when the storms start whistling at his face. It's when he's starting to think to himself, this can't be real. Maybe I'm hallucinating. Maybe these storms are starting to get closer and closer. And then he starts sinking. We've all been there. We try to keep our eyes on Jesus, and then the storms of life blow in. We might not have enough to be able to make next month's rent. We're worried about our family. We're asking ourselves, who's going to meet my needs? And then those storm clouds start gathering. When we substitute fear and despair and hopelessness in the place of God, that's when the idol sinks in, because honestly, after that, what happens is we start trying to control our own environment. Let me put it to you like this. If I was on a construction crew, and I showed up, and there's this great big beam that's right out in front of me. Let's say this thing weighs 20 tons. I have to get a crane to be able to move this thing. I obviously can't pick it up with my bare hands. And so the foreman comes to me and says, "Gaunt, I need you to jump in that crane and be able to move this thing." I don't know how to operate a crane. So I try to get into this thing, and I'm thinking, okay, this shouldn't be too hard. One lever here, one lever here. It's basically a gigantic set of hands that I'm trying to use to be able to control this thing, but I don't know how. So I fumble, and I falter, and the beam gets dropped. Whenever we worry, we're like that. Because here's this humongous challenge in front of us that we don't know what to do, and so we try to do our best, and we jump into the machine of life, and we're trying to fumble our way through this thing. God is the only one who's equipped to take care of our needs. He's the only one equipped to take care of our needs. When we start acting the place of God, we fumble the beam. And so, Jesus says, don't be like the Gentiles. And whenever he says that, he's just saying, don't be like the people that don't know God. On the other hand, we know God. We claim to know. And when Jesus came, we can now know who God is, what God's like, and we can have new life and freedom. For that was Jesus' mission. And freedom from sin also includes freedom from anxiety and worry. Freedom to seek the kingdom of God in all areas of life. And so Jesus says that because we know God, we can have the confidence to seek his kingdom first and trusting that he's going to provide the rest. And so you might be asking, all right, Craig, that's all well and good, but what does it mean to seek his kingdom first? Did you ever realize that whenever you focus your eyes on something, your body will start following that? Like if I were to turn my head this way, but if I try to walk this way, my body's eventually going to keep shifting and shifting, and it's going to go where my eyes are going to go. If we focus our eyes on Jesus, if we seek to make living his kingdom the main focus of our lives, eventually everything else will follow that. Everything else will start to take on that pattern. If you actively put God first in your life in all areas, your actions will follow because they'll start to take on his pattern. Your thoughts will be like God's thoughts because you'll be thinking his thoughts after him. His character will be your pattern. You'll live for him. And in doing so, you'll do good to all. Bottom line, do what you see him doing. Do what you see God doing in the Bible, and do what you see God doing in the world. He gave us the faith. And just like that potted seed that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, it's now our responsibility to make that faith work. It's not faith or works, it's faith that works. It's faith that grows, that produces fruit. But if you want an illustration, this is the best one I can come up with. Let me tell you a little story about Johnny. See, Johnny grew up in the United States of America, and Johnny loved it here. He was given all kinds of opportunities. He was given a safe place to live, a good school to go to, nice family to grow up in. And he could go to sleep at night knowing his country would protect him. And so Johnny felt that because his country had shown him grace, he was going to give something back. So he goes to his local army recruiter, and he signs the dotted line. And whenever he did that, he now realizes he's become property of the United States government. And so Johnny goes through the process, and the very first thing he has to do is he has to swear an oath. I hereby solemnly swear to protect, defend, and uphold the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. He took the oath, he got on a bus, and he heads out to basic. In basic, they sit Johnny down, and if anybody here, I know we've got some military veterans, if I'm way off, grab me after service, tell me it's not how it was, but this is how I thought it was. They say to Johnny, we know you're going to need food. We'll take care of that. 3 square meals in the mess hall. We know you're going to need clothing. We took care of that. Here's your t-shirt, your shorts, here's your BDU, which is your battle dress uniform. Here's your fatigues, and here's your parade uniform. We took care of the clothing for you. We know that you can't do this on your own. So instead of putting you by yourself, we're going to put you in a bunk with 8 or 16 other guys. Everything you're going to need, Johnny, we've already provided for you. And you've sworn an oath. So we're asking you in return for this is to follow our orders. To trust us that whenever we give you that order, we're doing so because we know what's best. Now I understand governments aren't perfect, people aren't perfect, but I think the metaphor here is pretty apt. Because just like Johnny, that was all of us. God showed us his grace. He showed us his goodness first. And whenever we were wrenched in the heart to be able to dedicate our lives to him, we also took an oath. We said we promised that we're going to seek his kingdom first. And we took this oath not to a piece of paper, not to an idea. We took this oath of loyalty to a person. We took this oath of loyalty to no less a king, and we took this oath of loyalty no less than the King of Kings. And just like Johnny, we can rest assured that whenever we took that oath, the King was going to provide for us. He knows we need the food. He knows we need the clothes. He knows we need the stuff to live. And he'll provide for us. And so, that main oath, to seek the kingdom of God first and all of his righteousness, that's what our overall objective is. Every order Johnny ever gets in the military is going to be based on supporting, protecting, defending the Constitution. Everything that Jesus tells us to do in our life is in support of the overarching oath that we took, to seek his kingdom and all of its righteousness. What that looks like in your life, what that looks like in my life may differ. It might differ depending on where we're at in life. But each and everything that he tells us to do is for the sake of us working in his kingdom. And it starts off with changing our thinking. Because the devil works overtime to try to get our eyes off of Jesus. The devil works overtime to try to get our eyes on all those storms, not God. And yet Jesus shines through all of that. We come here and we talk about the grace of God, and we think it's something spiritual, something that we sing about in a hymn, maybe something that we hear Craig preach about once a week. But do you realize that God's grace encompasses so much more? Every piece of food you eat, every breath that you take, even every moment you're still alive on this earth, is a moment of God's grace to you. Is a moment of God's grace to you. So our thinking must not be, Lord, the problems are too great. The way we must be thinking is, Lord, the problems are great, but you're greater. The problems may be big, but you're bigger. The problems may be threatening to overwhelm us, but you can overwhelm them. You guys remember the story of David and Goliath? Not the actual fight, but remember the story of David and Goliath? David comes and reports to Saul. What does Saul try to do? Saul tries to give him this armor, right? Can David fit in it? No. It's too big, it's too bulky, probably walking around looking like a robot. So David realizes, I have to trust God on this. The armor's not going to fit. I have to trust God on this. And we all know the rest of the story. Whenever we worry, it's like trying to put on that big armor that doesn't fit. And it constrains us, and it cripples us with anxiety, and we can barely move. And yet, God encourages us not just to be like David, but I heard it once put this way. God is our David fighting our battles for us. God is our David fighting our battles for us. He doesn't just equip us and say, okay, get going. No. He's the one with the 5 stones and the sling. He says to Goliath, which is all of our problems in life, don't worry. I'll take care of this. I will care for you. He provides for one another. He provides for us through one another, through community. This isn't just a nice sentiment. The Old Testament actually set it up like this. When people used to come and bring their sacrifices, back in the olden days with all these other idols, they used to bring the sacrifices to the priests and they'd eat them all up and they basically said to the poor people, okay, get out of here. But back in the Old Testament with God and with his people, you want to know what they would do? You would come, you'd bring your sacrifice, maybe a little bit of it gets burned up on the altar, and a little bit of it goes to the priest, and basically for at least one of those sacrifices, God told the people, the rest of the calf, you get it. You get to have a barbecue. I just want a little bit of it, but you get to have the rest. This was the system he set up. If you actually read through the book of Chronicles, this is God setting up all of this. He's saying, listen, take the bounty that I've given to you, give a little bit of it to me as your highest priority, and then learn to feed one another. That's how he provides. So if we as a community together seek God's standards, we will by definition seek others' good. If we're seeking to live in the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, we will start to provide for one another. So to summarize all this, trust Jesus throughout everything. Trust Jesus, do your part, and then trust him to do his. Trust him to do his. We're studying through Max Lucado's book Ephesians. Well, he actually has another book that addresses worry. And he gives us this advice. Meet today's problems with today's strength. Plan, but don't tackle tomorrow because you don't have tomorrow's strength yet. Don't tackle the plans of tomorrow because you don't have tomorrow's strength yet. Tomorrow you will have that strength because God's faithful, but you just have enough for today. Do you really want the solution to worry? It's not a pill. It's not some kind of artificial thing. You really want the solution to anxiety? Be thankful to God for what he has done. And be thankful to God for what he is doing. This is the way to rely on him for tomorrow. We use God's strength to accomplish what is set before us today. Because today's accomplishment is tomorrow's lesson. We make God our top priority. And this is not just nice moral lessons. This isn't just a nice pithy saying. There's something deeper here. And this is what I want all of us to hang on to. We make God our top priority because if you look at God all throughout the Scriptures, especially in Jesus Christ, especially in his death on the cross and resurrection, God made us his top priority. We make God our top priority because God has made us his top priority. Jesus' teaching on wealth and worry, part 1 and part 2 of these messages, is rooted firmly in what he's done for us. And if he's done all of this for us, if he's given us his word, his truth, his creation, if he's given us his only begotten Son, can he not care for you in the little things? The answer to that question, can God care for our every need, gets answered when we look at the cross, because in the cross, that's God's divine answer. Can I care for you, my child? Yes. Let's pray. Father, anxiety and worry grips us, and oftentimes it paralyzes us and makes us unable to move. We just ask now that you would remind us of your constant goodness, that each and every breath that we take, each and every step that we make, each and every day that we live is a gift from you, and that you're going to provide for us. Help us to trust you even in those weakest moments. In Jesus' name.